All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a design subcommittee meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission. Today's date is Tuesday, October 22nd, and this is session A of the BCDC Design Subcommittee. The Planning Department continues hosting public meetings in a virtual setting for the health, safety, and accessibility of Boston residents. I'm Christina Rico, Executive Director of the Boston Civic Design Commission and Senior Urban Designer at the City of Boston Planning Department. Before we proceed with the agenda, the open meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded. Therefore, please be aware that the Commission staff is making an audio and video recording of this meeting. Please turn off your camera and microphone if you do not wish to be recorded. For the purposes of the record, Commissioners Mick-Young Kim, Mimi Love, and David Manfredi are present, and I believe we are expecting Commissioner Jonathan Evans later this evening. Tonight's agenda will include presentations for Drexel Village, Roxbury, and 250 Everett Street, Brighton. Tonight's meeting proceedings will follow the typical BCDC Design Subcommittee format, beginning with a brief presentation from the proponent, comments from BCDC commissioners, and public testimony. And before I do the intro to the first project, Drexel Village, have Jonathan and Cesare, are you both promoted to co-host and able to speak?
Thank you.
Great. I'm going to just give a very brief introduction here. A proposed project referred to as Drexel Village, also known as Crescent Parcel, seeking Article 80B, large project entitlement, contemplates approximately 346,000 square feet of mixed-use development, including approximately 217 residential units, a majority of which, 75% of which, will be income restricted. So this is an affordable housing project. There's some amount of ground floor retail, 2,000 square feet of community use, 12,000 square feet of daycare, and 60 off-street parking spaces in 3 buildings on a 2.46 acre site. The project preserves 21,000 square feet of parish space for St. Catherine and an existing structure on site. Of the 13 parcels that comprise the site, 11 are controlled by public agencies and 2 are owned by the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Boston. This will be the second presentation of the proposed project to the Design Subcommittee, following introduction at the July 9th monthly meeting and a subsequent Design Subcommittee meeting on August 20th. It's my understanding that there are no commissioners present who intend to recuse themselves from these deliberations. A reminder to the proponent teams that presentations will be limited to 15 minutes and we will give you a 2-minute warning. And with that, I invite the proponent team to begin presenting whenever ready.
Thank you, Christina and team. I just want to try to share my screen here. Okay, can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, excellent. Thank you once again. Good afternoon. We're going to try to be very quick because there's a lot in this slide deck. As Christina mentioned, I'm Jonathan Garland with JGE Architecture and Design. Since the last time we were here, there were representatives from TAT. We've stepped in to help along the way in this entitlements permitting phase, and still working within our capacity as JGE Development co-developer with the Planning Office of Urban Affairs. I'm joined by Cesare of Ground Landscape, and between him and I, we will run through where we are today. What I have on screen are the subcommittee comments from the last time we were before you back in late August with Catherine, David, Laura, and Jonathan Evans. I won't read through the comments, but generally there was some feedback around the B3 building and how we would better relate that to the church, to the open space, to the streetscape, to the corner type element in which it holds. There were other comments here about, on the landscape side, expanding the play area with seating and other moves. And again, read through these, but I won't go through them one by one. We feel that we've captured a good deal of these comments in our latest round of design thinking. Wanted to start broadly, just to, again, build context, this idea of that the site is at a convergence of a number of different neighborhoods and interstitched communities. You know, we have Lower Roxbury, the edge, you could say the beginning and the end of We also have the South End, the Northeastern community, Wentworth, Mission Hill, all kind of culminating around our site. Looking at that in 3 dimensions and at scale, we can start to understand neighborhood density and connections. The idea that Tremont Street in many ways is being put together as a high spine. And then from that, we start to have other mid-rise and low-rise components that spread out beyond that, but really building up a climatic high spine that's partly to do with what's happening at Northeastern, partly to do with what's happening at P3 and the Whittier Choice neighborhood, as well as now the Drexel Village project. We're trying to be responsive with urban design, and some of these colors are meaningful in terms of how we have dealt with the massing and how we've dealt with the height and scale, where we think the B1 building on our site, which is located here, really is speaking to what's happening across Tremont from a height and scale standpoint. The B2 building speaking to the 5 to 6 story building stock sort of north of the site here. And then as the site and the building terraces down, we have lower volumes that speak to the residential community that's along Ruggles Street. Looking at public parks and open spaces, we've begun to catalog where these open spaces are and then also qualitatively what they are. We think of our site as not so much a destination where you will sort of plan your day around the site, but really it's a sense of porous activity. There's a level of porosity where this might become a qualitative, just moment throughout your day as you're going from one part of the community to the other. You might choose to walk through the Drexel Village open space and enjoy some time there, but really thinking about it in the framework of it being a porous open space. Wanting to do a quick buildup of layers here, thinking about building placement and site constraints. The elements in red are givens. Those are things that are pre-existing that we really want to work around, and also that help us honor the merits of the RFP. The existing mature trees on site are paramount. We've done a lot to try to retain those and preserve those, and you can see those in the red, as well as the existing Drexel Village Parish, or sorry, the existing St. Catherine Drexel Parish in the red outline. So that very immediately starts to outline where can we place buildings in an efficient way that are, working with the affordable housing program, the mixed use program, street edges, and by placing them around the perimeter, then we're also left with this interesting open space in the center. Starting to carve those edges and carve away from those corners, again, to preserve trees, preserve tree roots, but then also open up views and go back to this idea of a porous site, open up view corridors and interlinked connectivity. And then can we peel those back and open them even more? So by articulating the building edges and thinking about the impact to units, we've also gone a fair distance with unit planning to make sure these units work, but peeling these back, looking at some conditions at the ground plane underneath the volume that really help to create this idea of a welcoming invitation to the public realm, so that the inner part of the park does not feel owned, it does not feel privatized by the residents, but there's a conscious balance of what feels like a backyard for residents, but also what feels like a public invitation where you're not trespassing into this open space. And then this would be the resulting ground plane. As you can see, this building here with B1 with the idea of a volume structured overhead, but at the first 2 floors, you would have this really, we almost think of it like a swing door, like this kind of swings open and you get this really inviting move into the site. And then also here, peeling these back so that we can preserve trees and the idea that you can see pretty much through the site. Programmatically, we wanted to understand what happens at the ground plane and how we're activating these edges. So with B1, thinking about a cafe or some sort of a retail use that could have outdoor seating, some way of activating that space, commercial along Tremont Street. We then placed the lobby along this side of the site, thinking that there could be some synergy between these 3 lobbies, the one in the red, the one in the blue, the one in the purple, almost like a triad of lobby synergies for the residents. But also that really helps to preserve this far left corner for this idea of open, public activation along the most critical part of the site, from a pedestrian standpoint at Tremont Ruggles. And then with B2, we have the entrance to the parking off Rayner Circle, a lobby that would be visible with its front door along Rayner Circle. And then we have bikes and lounge space also at the ground floor. Finally, the B3 building where we're showing parish space, daycare space with its open, with its directly accessible tot lot space, and then also lobby there. And then looking at access points. I think I'm getting an echo. I don't know why. And then also looking at access points where we have a dual entry lobby for the B1 building. And then again, that idea of connecting the lobby spaces here. The height, the vertical community, just looking at how these heights play into the rest of the neighborhood. We've tried to identify some of the heights in the area, partly with the new building proposed at 840 Columbus there, as well as International Village and Whittier Choice, and seeing how those heights compare. And then also this diagram really does show that B1 is part of this Tremont high spine narrative. B2 is part of the mid-rise corridor between 5 and 10-story buildings, if you include the stuff at P3. And then this other kind of portion building at the corner of B3 as we're engaging the church is actually part of the 3 and 4-story building stock, which relates better to the residential neighborhood. And then you'll see that in its massing form and how the program relates to the volumes themselves from various views. Sorry, I'm going quickly here. I'll turn it to Cesare to walk us through some of the landscape improvements.
Good evening. These are some diagrams that we showed last time, just to reiterate the importance of the preservation of the trees that was already stated in the RFP and in the community process behind it. Next slide, please. One important design consideration is that the trees along Melnia Cas are planted on a mound, which cannot be removed, of course, without risking the trees. In the next slide, we have the open space concept that we also presented last time. So embracing this idea of keeping the trees as an asset, as well as a symbol for the community empowerment, we decided to propose an increased canopy, an increased number of trees by creating an urban grove with a clearing in the middle of the site. This will be a multi-generational neighborhood amenity that welcomes people from the different communities that are living on site and in the surrounding areas, like Jonathan showed in the other slides. Next slide, please. So the landscape-focused feedback that we received from Laura Solano were very helpful for us to advance the design, and we also refined the overall language to better accommodate these changes. This is the plan we presented last time, and the main 2 comments were to use the idea of play to activate the central space, as well as engage a wider range of ages and create a place to watch within the site. Next slide. So this diagram is showing the pedestrian connectivity, and you see in orange the orange line represent the primary pathways through the site, and their curves are influenced by the connection across roadways and the desired movement throughout the site. In blue, we are proposing a winding path that can be used to explore nature in a playful or meditative way, which I'll show you in the next slides. Then there is a diagram about programs after this. This winding path that you see in blue, the first part on the left behind the church, that's something that we are calling the exploration trail. This is a path where children and playful adults can encounter objects like large rocks, logs, and picnic tables under the canopy of newly planted trees. It starts at Ruggle Plaza, where there will be a cafe, and it continues behind the church, passing between the ABCDC playground and the central lawn. Then this winding path transition into a raised boardwalk, the number 4 in this plan, underneath the existing huge elm trees. And in this area, the path takes on a more contemplative feel, with a bench or 2 just to sit alone with a friend. In the next slide, we see an updated render plan where you can see more clearly the idea of the clearing, and around it, the winding path that disappears into the tree grove and reappears in certain areas. Number 7 marks a meetup point where the 3 lobbies that Jonathan was indicated converge in the middle. And the number 1, 2, and 3 indicate the main site entries. And I can show you more about this in the view. Next slide. So these are a few site sections. The first one is cutting between the church and the building 2. In the next slide, there is a zoom in where we can see the exploration trail on the left, the central lawn, the meetup point, and the existing growth of the trees on the right. And you can see in proportion how big they are. Next slide, we are sectioning between the building 3 and building 1. And zooming in, we see the ABCD playground. Next slide, please, Jonathan. You see the playground that is wrapping around the corner of building 3. And then there is the exploration trail that is in between the playground and the central lawn, and then it's building 1 on the right. In the next section, we are not cutting through the building, and we are cutting through the open space. The next slide to see more about it. On the left, there is the neighborhood entry. And from there, we transition to the boardwalk on the right. And you see in the photo below, there is the photo of the actual elm tree. And the trunk is massive, and we are celebrating this tree with this boardwalk. Next slide. So now we have a few bird's eye view. This is a view of the Ruggles Plaza at the corner between Ruggles and Tremont that is inviting people in. The next slide. Here is a view from Raynor Circle, where you see the neighborhood entry located in between the lobby of building 2 and the daycare program on the opposite side, and the boardwalk in the background under the existing trees. Next, bird's eye view. So this is the, and I apologize because the street trees along Tremont Street are not showing, but of course we are planting new street trees along Tremont Street. And this view is focused on the elm entry, where there is in the corner of building 2 in correspondence of a crosswalk that we should also have represented in this view. But here you can see the boardwalk that is continuing and becoming the Explorer Trail in the back. Now we have some high-level view. This is the view of Ruggles Plaza with the cafe seating and the church in the background. In the next view, there is another view of Ruggles Street that is looking inside the site. This sculpture that you see next to the church facade is just a placeholder because there is an ongoing public art process in collaboration with the Elma Lewis Center that will show the actual art piece. This is a view of the neighborhood entry with the lobby on the right and the daycare program on the left. And you can see the scale of this site is just relating to Raynor Circle and the scale of the building on the other side. This is the elm entry, and here the mast is really creating an entry that is respecting the trees and at the same time is inviting people in. And from here you can see throughout the site with the church in the background. This is a view of the boardwalk, and the idea is to have just a bench of or 2 underneath the larger elm that you see in the background there. And this is a way to enjoy and celebrate the tree without getting too close to it and without basically putting it in danger. This is a view of the exploration trail with this object located on its side. And we imagine here kids jumping from one rock to the other, or some people walking their dog or stopping by to have lunch at a picnic table. This is a view of the central lawn with the exploration trail, this winding path on the right and the meetup point on the left. And finally, this is the last slide. This is a view from the meetup point where people from the different building can meet, or people can just enjoy the life that is happening around them. So there is the lawn on one side, and there is the elm tree on the opposite, people passing by.
Thanks, Cesare. And we're just going to try to get to the end here. Looking at the building, wanting to understand some of the articulation moves. This is B1, as we're showing an articulation of sort of a 3-story stack here, and then a 4-story and a 4-story to just help ground the building, and also look at this interplay between this portion of the facade that comes down right at the corner of Ruggles and Tremont versus these two portions here, which we almost look at like window bays. And then seeing that in full color, and as we're exploring materiality between warm and cool tones, but also what is a rather simple grid that helps to just ground the building and pops up where you want it to, which is kind of giving you that open invitation into the open space. Looking at B3 more specifically, trying to relate where this portion of the volume comes out to Ruggles and Rayner Circle, employing a 2-story height, which really works with the predominant datum line of the church as well as the roof line of the church. So we think that this smaller scale volume really works to help break down the scale and negotiate around the corner, weaving from the church into the B3 building. And you can see that in full color, and with materiality, trying to do something that's distinctly different in material, not trying to in any way copy the warm buff brick of the church, but picking up on, say, the window rhythm, so that there are some context clues from the church and scale that I think are working in harmony with the church. And then looking at the view along Ruggles, again, just understanding the height of this underpass and making sure that daylight can get in there, and that if it's cafe seating, that it just feels open, warm, inviting, and creates that public invitation into the open space. This is back around the corner of Rayner and Ruggles, seeing that 2.5-story volume as it holds the corner, and then also negotiates into the more formal part of the housing volume. So just having a simple bookend here where the 5-story mass stops and allows this more sculpted, almost pavilion-like building to hold the corner and wrap around to the church. You can see it a bit lifted as a bird's eye view there. And then wrapping around to the Melnia and Cass and Tremont side of the site, where we have splayed these edges to create a wider aperture, more views into this open space. And the idea that the accented material on the left behind a brick frame becomes the field material as it pulls through the facade and really begins to narrate the inside of the core. So you can see like that's that warm tone materiality that may pull through the B2 and then show itself more boldly on the inside of the building, inside courtyard side of the building. Then you can see here again on Melnia and Tremont how this building is reading very horizontally, almost back and forth, symbolizing a lot of the pedestrian and vehicular movement that is so expressive on Melnia Cass Boulevard. This is a corner of B2 as it holds the corner and then transitions to the Madison Park residential village there to the left. There were some comments, questions from the last subcommittee about a change in height between B2 and B3, and that's what we're showing here, that B2 is a 6-story building, and that it then steps down to a 5-story building at B3, and then steps down yet again to a 2.5-story, which we think works really well with the 3-story buildings just to the left of us across the street. And also this view does a really good job of basically creating a view of a focal point. As you're coming into the open space, you're sort of looking right at the entry lobby of the B1 residential building right there. And you've got the other 2 lobbies of B2 and B3 right in the foreground. And then finally, this is our last 2 views. Back to the idea of B1 and how we're sculpting that building, a very simple partie articulating these 2 wings as almost like larger bay windows, and having, skin typology A and skin typology B on the flanking sides, and just how that works together, in a harmonious way to kind of provide accent, but also provide ways in which the building is stitching together. I think we'll end there and turn it back to the commission. Thank you.
Commissioners, before you begin deliberations, I just want to apologize for anyone in attendance who is here for Northeastern University. That is session B. So we just want to make sure that folks in the public are aware that we published a correction to the agenda yesterday. This is for Drexel Village and 250 Everett Street. Northeastern University, the 262 St. Botolph and 17 Bradston Street are in the other session. please let me know if you need a link to that to register to that session. Sorry for the interruption.
Thanks, Christina. And I see that Commissioner Evans has also joined us. Jonathan, I know we were kind of a little bit in the presentation, but I feel like you saw most of it and are familiar enough to comment. But with that, I mean, we're only 4 tonight. I don't think anyone has to raise their hand. Feel free to chime in with comments, commissioners. I'm not worried about overlapping conversations happening.
Sure, yeah. Thank you, and apologies for being a little late here. Again, appreciate the thoroughness of the presentation. It's exciting transitional parcel. I think the diagrams are pretty well presented in terms of kind of the grade, the height as you kind of come down the space. I appreciate the thoughtfulness around the B3 massing and how you're kind of trying to create a relationship to the existing parish. Would love to hear other kind of commissioners' thoughts about that. I think I guess from my perspective, I think it's I think the sort of acknowledgement of scale, kind of roof forms, in some ways paying kind of homage to it without actually mimicking it is kind of nice, and you know, you're unapologetically kind of contemporary with it, which I think is pretty nice. I appreciate seeing some of these views here where we can see the parish from Tremont Street. I think that's sort of helpful to understand the context. I was a little concerned that with the cafe space there that you're kind of blocking the view there, but I think you're looks like you're being mindful of that. I think that's something I just continue to keep honing in on, just the sort of you know, to what extent that starts to become a kind of anchor in the landscape, and how visible is that parish from Tremont Street. I mean, I think right now it's I think that's something to keep being mindful of. I think, to be blunt, I think the B2, B3 massings are just already they're real big, but I think you've done a good job understanding the program with what you have to kind of try to make them, you know, get the 1-story difference there, and try to frame some corridors and preserve the existing tree canopy. So I appreciate what you've done within the kind of constraints you have there. So I think all in all, it's really come a good long way here.
Thank you, Jonathan.
David, I think you're talking, but on mute.
I am talking, but nobody's listening. I'm trying to remember the last presentation, and my it's a little blurry in my memory, but I'm impressed, and I think I'm right, that what you've really done since we saw you last is to simplify. There seems to be a calmness I don't remember there before, and what I mean by that is that while the massing hasn't changed dramatically, we had concerns about how the building on the south connected to the church. You've added resolution to that, but you've really simplified the materiality, although I have some questions. Can you go to page 53? Because I think we see almost all the buildings, if that's the right page. Yeah, so can you take us through each of the 3 buildings and describe the material palette?
Sure. Wanted to be a little bit light on that today, intentionally, just because we want to make sure that what we're talking about meets up with cost and passive house and a number of things. But I can tell you where we're thinking generally in the metal panel, in the brick veneer kind of world of things. For example, B2, the one here on the left-hand side, we're thinking could be a cooler gray, full depth brick veneer with some sort of maybe fiber cement infill panel, which gets this kind of playful nature of the windows as you're seeing, but also working within a very rudimentary grid that just runs orthogonally and keeps things generally in line, but within those bigger frames, there's some movement and some playfulness. back in the background of where B1 is, that could either be a metal panel, composite metal panel of two tones, a warmer tone, a cooler tone. We could look at some brick there as well. It's really to be determined. And then also with B3, looking at maybe a fiber cement or some sort of vertical striated longboard panel, something like that. Where we get lower to the church, I think there could be some analogous color range between the church, the smaller volume here, and B3, but maybe they're not the same exact material. That's kind of what we showed. If I can, yeah, here. If you look closely, it almost looks like there's some sort of cast stone material, and then there's some vertical panel here. We thought that would be our over the next month, we would work to kind of unveil and really explore materials, but that's where we're thinking right now.
And can you go now? I'm not sure. 40, maybe it's the next slide.
Sure.
Or the view on Tremont.
Okay. With next to Melnia
well,
Gas.
Yeah, you can stop there. You can stop
Okay,
there.
this
So
one,
I
yep.
guess I would.
The one before it.
I think there's a little delay. Yeah, no, this one's good. This one's good. 40.
Okay.
The one that this view in color.
Yes. Okay.
I think it's the next. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
So so I was reading this as brick and metal, with the body being brick. But now that I'm looking closer, and it was raising some other questions for me. I guess I would encourage. I like the way you presented it, by the way. The transition of black and white to color, especially without final commitment on materials, was really nice, because you got to see your thoughts about the organization of the facades and the building envelope, and then you brought them to life. But and I think go back now, one which just black and white, and I'll make a comment somebody made to me once. I like the drawings in black and white maybe more than I like the drawings in color, and I guess that's because there's a simplicity here, an organization that I think is really strong, and again kind of calm, and we see so much of buildings, especially residential, that are trying to do, in my opinion, way too much, and they mix too many materials and too many colors, and it's in some interest of breaking down the scale. And I often think to myself, why are we breaking down the scale? Maybe the scale's okay. And I think here the scale is absolutely okay. I think you're being very deferential to the church. I like the way you've separated the addition from the main body. I think you're totally complementary to, as you called it, I think you called it the high spine of Tremont. I think what's going to happen on P3 probably will be very, very similar. And I guess I would urge you to look hard at the black and white drawings in the very simple order, the base, the calm alignment of fenestration pattern, and not try to mix too many different metal panels of too many different colors that would blur that. Because there's a very nice clarity now on both on this building, the Tremont building, and then the building on the, I don't remember the letters, the building on the south side that which I think is really nice. The one around the corner, let me see, on the south, you had it up just the
B2. So this
see,
is
now, yeah, stop right here though. Stop.
Yes.
That was 40. 46, wasn't it? Go back to
40.
46.
46, okay, yep,
I think it was 46.
it's
Yeah,
46.
it wasn't 46. You know what, there's a delay, and so when I say stop, you've already gone
I'll
two
go
past
back
me.
one more.
Go back 45. Yeah, stop
Okay,
right there, 45.
yep.
So when you added the color, you added complexity. And I don't think this building needs that complexity. I think the building's strong. The base is strong, the 2 stories, the simple stack of openings that I was reading as masonry, but I understand that's your decision and you're still working on, and costs will come into that. But I don't think you need all of that. I don't think you need all of that next layer of patterning. I think it's
Makes sense.
strong. And I think, and I would say that about all 3 of them. Now, so go around, and I don't remember, what's the street on the south side? The short street.
Rainer Circle.
Yeah. So that building, yeah, okay. The building all the way down at the eastern end of Rainer
Yeah,
Circle.
so that would be this guy, the B2 building.
Yeah. Is there there's another drawing coming up very soon.
I'll go slowly. This
Yeah,
one.
thank you.
This one.
Yeah, it's that, and I think that one's different, but the
Mhm.
frame is strong. You are there sliding some things past each other, but
Right.
it's not, there's not this kind of layering that feels like things are being tacked on. It feels integrated, but I guess I would urge you to don't overcomplicate the base black and white drawing you have.
Mhm.
That's not to say that I want black and white buildings, but the simplicity of the black and white, that that the color or the materiality corresponds to the massing moves you're making, which are very simple and very straightforward, and I think very strong.
Excellent, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I would agree, quickly agree and sort of say that the fact that I think the design moves holds up in black and white and doesn't rely on the color to sort of show what you're doing. I think that's another way of saying what David just said, is strong. And yeah, I think the 3 building color composition kind of more or less complement each other. So I think that's all headed in a good direction.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll just, because we're talking about the architecture, I think what makes building B2 more successful in terms of the overall reading of the architecture is that the grid is so strong. And while building B1, I think is a very handsome building in terms of proportion, in terms of windows, somehow the grid starts to fade with the material play that you're doing. The composition of material play, I think, is dissolving the grid a little bit. And maybe that's a little bit of the reaction. I'm just going to throw in one little twist to this. Because the grid is so strong on B2,
Mhm.
I really think that the palette should explore a little bit more color. I'm not suggesting to go crazy, but there is a lot of color in the neighboring lower scale buildings adjacent. And you have punctuated windows that are either balconies or something that I'm seeing that are somewhat
Express
random.
frames, yes.
Yeah, the express frames, maybe that has a color. I don't want to pretend to tell you how to do it, but I feel like you
Right.
could add more color in the B2 building. So it's not exactly the same color palette as B1.
Yeah, one of the things, I'm loving this conversation because one of the things we started to do was look around the city at other projects that had multiple buildings of different scales that were kind of thought about in sequence. And what about them, what elements are complementary, what elements are contrasting, and why, and so like what is the common. So in some cases, we've taken the window proportions of each of the 3 buildings and applied them across, thinking that that would provide some sense of glue. We tried to stay within this like warmer tone, whether it's expressed in this material or metal panel, but similar kind of warm tone, and then also similar kind of cool tone. But I totally understand these points, and even the idea of like just the simplicity that the black and white provides, and once we get into, even when we change materials, we're going to get a different effect from the sunlight, and that's going to provide its own variety. So I think we can think about that when we go to the next round of material.
You know, Mimi, part of my comment, I happened to drive past this block yesterday and saw the building that's under construction. And I think part of my reaction is you can be, you've got the corner, you've got the most important piece of real estate here. You've got the historic building, you got this view, which is the view into the center of the site. And by the way, I like the building placement, and I like very much, Cesare, the changes you made in the landscape. I think you can be, I don't know, you can be the calm in the storm. And
I know what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So enough said.
Can we look at building B3?
Sure.
And then maybe we can transition to landscape. I think B3 is really successful. By the way, this whole project is I only saw it when it was introduced, and I think it's come a really long way. So it looks really great. I think we're at the point of just, refinement rather than complete changes. But what I think is really successful about B3 is the massing. And maybe if you get a more frontal view where you have that
Yes.
recess and that
Yeah.
little setback, I think that's really successful. And I just wondering if that could be explored along Raynor Circle as well, because I feel where that roof and that composition is a little bit, I guess there's a little bit more tension on Raynor Circle where there isn't that little gap between, but yet you have an entrance. I feel like it could happen. And the roof form, I like the contemporary roof form. It's a nod to the church. I get it. I just wonder, is it occupiable? Does it have to be that high? Because it is going to block some windows, or is some weird relationship to the units along the side. I mean, they're kind of minor points, but I feel like you're still exploring what that roof form should be. And if you are, maybe the height is one of the things that you continue to look at.
Right. Okay. Understand both comments.
And then I'm going to transition to the landscape, because then maybe we can get more landscape comments. But I really think that the strategy makes a whole bunch of sense. I really like this idea of the natural playground and the boardwalk. And I look forward to more comments from Commissioner Kim. But the thing that felt really odd in all of it, and I can't figure out if it was the precedent image or is the playground with the synthetic materials and colors. I just wonder if it should stay more in line with a natural playscape that you see for playgrounds, and it's more explorative than so synthetic and
Did you mean this one here?
yeah.
Mimi, on the lower
And
left?
I don't know if it's just represents playground and you have a different impression, or if you have a view of that you shared with us.
Yeah, so we haven't given a deep thought about the design of the playground. For now, we are just thinking about how big it should be based on the requirement of the ABCDC. So for now, we just look at the location and the interaction of the playground with the rest of the site. But next time we will look at it and we will consider making it. It makes sense to make it natural because of the rest of the site we're embracing that concept. So also the playground, even if it's fenced off, should have the same character. I think you're right. The president is wrong, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I hadn't seen this project before, so this is my first time seeing it, but I do think there's been a real improvement in the kind of strategic plan of the project. I do appreciate, first of all, I just want to talk about Tremont Street. I think that this project is a great improvement to Tremont Street, which is a really tough pedestrian experience today. So every new project that brings a kind of more generous pedestrian way with planting and trees, it's going to really make Tremont Street feel more like a neighborhood. So I think that's a great, when I looked at your sections, I could see that there's a real effort and there's a kind of setback to the building that's more generous than we usually see on Tremont Street. So I think that's great. I think from the previous iteration, which I've been studying in August, and even prior to that, this idea of having a kind of clearing at the center, I think has become clearer in this scheme. But I'd say there's one piece of this that I think that we could continue to look at. I agree with Mimi about the playground, maybe having, more nature play. You infer that in some of the drawings, and maybe it is maybe more open and not kind of as graphically designed. It could just be a little bit more free. But it's the trellis that I see here, and I saw in the previous iteration where it was a triangle, I believe. I'm not sure I'm reading these correctly. And I think they're being conceived of as a kind of object at the kind of heart of the center of this park. And I just would encourage you to either, if that's the intention for the trellis, to make it a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more of the center, so it feels a little small, or that when you had the triangle, it felt like it was almost getting to the place where it was creating a frame, and it was like an edge, which would also define this kind of notion of a clearing in the woods. And so that's the only piece of this design that I would really ask you to take a look at, which is, I love the boardwalk. I think the boardwalk could be part of the playscape as well. But it's that kind of object, like whether it's a triangle or a kind of open air circle. It seems like you could think about it a little bit more and understand what its uses are and what its intention is to the overall project. Because I do believe it's the only kind of three-dimensional architectural element in the project. And then the last piece of it, which I can't quite tell, but I'm hoping that you'll say that you're looking at, is that when you're designing the landscape, that it's not dead flat. That it has, especially in that kind of curvilinear discovery path that you have, that has the option to have some very gentle undulation, and so that there's a real difference between what's marked as 8 and then like the area that's 5, or the areas around it. But I think overall it's going to be a real asset to this neighborhood, and I think it's really come a long way.
Thank you, Mika. Yes, for the space on the side of the widening path, we were thinking about three-dimensional, not just planting, but also some berming to
Right.
to mark the difference.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think it needs to be like 4-foot tall
No.
berms. It could be, like all the parks in London have this beautiful condition when you think it's dead flat, and then when you see someone else walking, you only see them from like lower torso up, and so there's this just a sense of kind of a gentle sense of kind of green enveloping you. I think that would be appropriate for this place.
And I have a question about the trellis. So
Yeah.
just to understand if I understood correctly. So you're looking for a trellis. So you in mind you had a trellis that is more sculptural. It's more like the centerpiece of this space, more protagonist. In terms of...
Well, I'm not sure, because right now I don't feel like it has enough presence to be the center, but it is sort of a kind of an element at the destination. I guess for me, a kind of a circle with a hole in it, also kind of in terms of use as a protection from the elements and the wind, make it less effective. And so I think it acts as both a kind of edge and a kind of center, and it kind of does a little bit of both and not a lot of both. And so maybe you should make a decision. I don't want to say to you it should be this, but right now it feels a little tentative. And when it was the triangle, it looked like it was going in the direction of being an edge, where those edges where you have like seating all around it and everyone's facing the lawn. And so I'm trying to figure out, like, how do people use that piece, which is going to be probably the biggest square footage cost in the project, and how do you start to like really make it an amenity for everybody.
Understand. Thank you.
Mhm.
Can I ask one last question about Tremont Street, or a question on in terms of drop off? Where does like drop off happen for building one, B1? Because I'm just cognizant about that turn. Everyone's like trying to get into, you know, the right hand lane to turn onto Milena Cass, and a lot happens in that
Right.
block. Is
Right.
there like a drop off lane or
For example, Uber kind of thing.
exactly?
Yeah. Um, I would have to say to be explored along Tremont. I know that there is a significant effort by the city as they're looking at, as you can see, reconstructed bike lanes. And the idea that we could get a lay-by, I think, is what you're sort of thinking about. We would probably need to engage with civil and more with the city to see what the possibilities are on that front. Right now, I think we were sort of relying on Ruggles Street to see if there would be a lighter lift there. I just know that, you know, Tremont compared to Ruggles, it's likely that Ruggles may have a little bit more of an easier time than all of the demand that ends up on Tremont. But we can follow up. I don't think I have a full clear answer on that yet.
Yeah. I mean, I think where the cafe is, where your lobby is, and building B makes sense. It's just challenging as it relates to drop off, and we know that'll
Certainly,
be a real
yes.
thing.
Yeah, yeah, we'll follow up on that.
Commissioners, any more comments?
I was just gonna say, I'm wondering if I could solicit public testimony, Mimi, and then flip it back to you guys for some next steps.
Sounds great.
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press the *9 on your dial pad to activate the raised hand function. Sorry, *9 to activate the raise hand function, and 6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Commissioners, at this time, I see no hands raised, so we're going to close public testimony. And we don't need a vote, just sort of clear the next steps.
So commissioners, we need to make a decision if we think we want to see this in subcommittee again, or if we are ready to have this reviewed by the full commission.
I would propose that we could go back to full commission with a list of the things that we have asked the proponent to study more. That would include, and people can add to my list, that would include not necessarily commitment to materiality, but a strategy about exterior materials, number, variety, color. Number one. Number two, the comments that Mick Young made with regard to landscape, especially I thought the idea, I'd like to learn more about topography and the opportunity to make some. And some of the details, Mimi, that you added about roof form. I may be forgetting something else there, but with a list of those things that we would expect to see in full commission. When if I've forgotten anything, please add.
Yeah, I support that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like the comments that we have could be really managed through the planning department staff over the next month as they prepare to come back to full commission. And we are right on time, which makes me happy. To David, we got all of your time in and a couple minutes more.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
But team, any questions? We're sending you back to full commission with a little bit of work to do beforehand, but I think you're in great shape.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
I think your partner is going home, Mimi.
Yes, there he is. Whoops. I have the car keys.
Good night,
Good
everybody.
Good night, David.
Good night.
Good night.
All right. While Lizzie works to promote the next group, 250 Everett Street to co-host, just wanted to flag that we're also going to get a brief presentation from planning department staff, LOIs, and Jonathan Palazzo. And I'm going to have a brief summary here of the project. A proposed project at 250 Everett Street, Brighton, seeking Article 80C and Article 80B entitlements, contemplates the demolition of 20,500 square feet of existing commercial use in a single building and the development of approximately 250,000 square feet of residential use, or approximately 240 dwelling units, and 120 off-street parking spaces in a single building on an approximately 1.82 acre site. This will be the second presentation of the proposed project to the design subcommittee following an introduction at the February 6th, 2024 monthly meeting and a subsequent design subcommittee meeting on September 17th. It's my understanding that there are no commissioners present who intend to recuse themselves from deliberations. And a reminder to the proponent team that presentations will be limited to 15 minutes and planning department staff will give you a 2-minute warning. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ella and JP for staff comments.
Great, thanks, Christina. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, commissioners. This is my first BCDC subcommittee. Thanks for having me. My name is Ella Wise. Can you all hear me? Okay, great. I'm a senior planner on the planning review team within the planning department, and I've been working closely with urban designers to review the 250 Everett proposal. I'm here to reiterate some of the planning and zoning context that staff have used to guide our review of the project. Planning Director Amy Chambers introduced the planning and zoning context to the full committee, but I understand that there's interest in kind of revisiting that at this point in the review process. So the Western Avenue Corridor Rezoning Study, known as WACRZ, that's this acronym, this funny acronym here, was adopted by the BPDA board 2 years ago in October 2022. So you can see the WACRZ study area outlined in red on the left-hand side of your screen. The high-level points of the study are to allow new housing development with nodes of higher density at Barry's Corner and near Boston Landing, create additional income-restricted housing via density bonus, and then to improve multimodal mobility along Western Ave through short-term ped and bike improvements, and then longer-term transit improvements in coordination with the MBTA. More specifically relevant to this project proposal, the study recommends use and dimensional standards pretty specifically. So the 250 Everett parcel is shown here in blue, and as you can see, it straddles 2 sub-areas of the study. So in the Barry's Corner sub-area shown here in dark orange, excuse me, the study recommends greater height up to 125 feet. And then in the Everett-Telford area shown here in yellow, the idea would be lower density with a max height of 65 feet. The recommended max lot coverage in both sub-areas is 60%. And the project as currently proposed is consistent with these planning standards. Okay, and then in terms of the map on the right-hand side of the screen, the study also envisions an expanded street network to introduce a finer grain network of streets and blocks with special attention, excuse me, to east-west connections on either side of Everett Street. Everett Street is what's just east of the parcel. So this image is copied straight from the study, showing in the dashed lines a potential new street network within that super block that's formed by Western Ave on the north and Everett on the east, basically exactly where the parcel is. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was the planning context. In terms of zoning, shortly after the study's adoption, its recommendations were codified with amendments to Article 51 adopted by the Zoning Commission. So specifically in this area, PDAs, planned development areas, are allowed when they advance the planning goals earlier summarized. So including, and this is defined in the zoning code, provision of affordable housing and creation of new street connections. PDA uses, the code also provides guidelines for use and dimensions of PDAs. So in terms of uses, PDAs must be consistent with base zoning or as expressly defined in the PDA. And then in terms of dimensions, the zoning establishes a max FAR with greater density allowed given greater affordability. It codifies that density bonus. So the project as currently proposed with 17% inclusionary housing units falls below the max FAR for the lower density subarea. So we see it as consistent with the zoning. And as my colleague JP will talk through next, staff have worked closely with the 250 Everett team on the site design to determine how it can help deliver those mobility objectives. What's the most beneficial new vehicular, pedestrian, and bike connections given the constraints and opportunities at the site and the vision of the Wackersy study. And with that, I'll pass it off to my colleague in urban design, JP.
Thank you, Ella. Hi, commissioners. Thank you for having me. My name is Jonathan Palazzolo, or JP, and I'm the urban designer that's been working on the design review team with the proponent. So the whole team has been working very closely with them to make sure that the project advances and supports the goals of the Wackersy plan, especially the mobility concerns. First and foremost being a potential new east-west connection for the neighborhood. And the proponent has worked in good faith with us. So I just want to give them a little bit of credit there that they have been working very closely with us. So I want to walk through some benefits that the project has integrated into their design that advance these goals. So first, the project is coordinating with a new east-west connection in the future, just north of the project site, and they are providing a complete streets compliant sidewalk on their north side. They've also been working closely with us to coordinate for a new north-south connection that you can see here on the plan just west of their property, and we'll be providing a complete streets compliant sidewalk on their side of the property line as well to coordinate with that effort. So that, in addition to any improvements that they're making on the Everett Street corridor, it means that there will be complete street compliant sidewalks on 3 of the 4 sides of this project. The property also has a rather significant grove of existing mature trees to their south side. So the project has been sited delicately to maintain a large number of those trees. And in doing so, the project will also be providing a rather meaningful open space on the south side of their property that can be shared with neighbors, and conserves a significant number of existing trees and advances a pedestrian east-west connection for the neighborhood. And so all of these things taken together, we think start to outweigh some of the benefits that may have been discussed before of either breaking the project down into 2 smaller masses and therefore providing a mid-block connection. I do want to go ahead and hand it over to the proponent team now to walk through their design updates. And I, again, thank the commissioners for their time and look forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you. Michelle, I don't know if you can share. Great, thank you. Appreciate everyone's time. Brian O'Connor from Cube 3. We got off to a rocky start last time and missed all of the context. So we're excited to be back with all of you. Let's just jump right in, Michelle. So what we heard at a high level was really let's ground the project in the context and the anticipated development patterns so that we can really understand what is the strategy here? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? Grounded in a lot of what Jonathan and Ella were nice enough to share at the beginning. Have a more defined public realm and landscape approach to share with all of you, and then to clarify our approach to building mass and scale. So we're going to kind of go through these fairly quickly. I want to really try to stay tight to the timeline. This is a little more of an advanced diagram. And as you can see, our site right in the middle is indicated with 65 feet. What we're trying to show here is that in gray, you can see approved projects. And in red, you can see the zoning heights that are allowed on all of the adjacent parcels. And so, as was mentioned, we're proposing 65 feet. which is compliant with zoning within a district of 65, going to 125 on the right. And within this corridor, we are compliant both with the FAR and the height. So the proposal is to develop this site within the guidelines of zoning and the broader WACR-Z guidelines, but develop it in a way that's sensitive both to the 10 and 20-year envelope of planning and to the neighborhood, which is immediate and existing context directly to the east or the bottom of the page. If you jump to the next slide, what we did is we cut two very sort of simple sections. The top section is a north-south section. Again, the gray buildings on either side in the extreme are approved projects. And the proposed red blocks are the compliant and allowable zoning in the WACR-Z planning. So the first section actually allows us to see that the proposed 65-foot height is really appropriate in scale and mass, stepping up to 125 feet to the right and back up to 125 to the left. It feels like adjacent to the McNamara House, and within the broader context of the planning here, the height seems very appropriate. The scale seems very appropriate. One of the things we've done since the last time we were together is take a step back and try to simplify and clarify and get really comfortable with the scale of what we're proposing here. And so we spent a lot of time on these sections. We spent a lot of time thinking about how the building mass works. And if we look in the other section along the bottom, the east-west, you can see the 65-foot cuts right through sort of where the rest of the WACR-Z district is at 65. And then it does step down gently towards Litchfield, where we go down to 45, and then we have the neighborhood on the east side across Everett Street. Jump to the next slide, Michelle. So we spent a lot of time looking at sort of the work that the staff had done and what they were thinking. And what we wanted to do is make really smart site decisions that support the city's planning goals. And so you see in red, the sort of area to the south that was indicated, that's the sort of tree preservation area that we've decided to really hold and develop into a strategic public realm space with a real eye towards preserving the trees in that area. You also notice in blue the sort of existing and proposed transportation network that Jonathan was nice enough to mention, which really allows us to sort of drive a building footprint within a transportation network that makes sense and looks towards the future, and within the idea of really preserving and saving trees on the south side. So when we started to think about sort of the planning of the building, one of the things we ran into quite early on was loading. And we spent a lot of time working with planning staff on vehicular access and loading. And where we ended up is sort of, you'll see it in future slides, but it is a driver of our conversations with the city. So I wanted to highlight it here. We tried to locate vehicular access into the building in a place along Everett that was very sympathetic to both the transportation networks and the proposed massing and design of the building itself. And so you'll see in future slides, we really worked hard to sort of create an opportunity to load off the street, completely internal to the building, in a way that really supported sort of the urban design goals and the planning goals, both in the WACR-Z and on this site itself. And so what is a big change from last time is the location of this was sort of odd in the last round. It was sort of halfway into a courtyard and halfway under the building. And we sort of reworked all of the building planning to allow that to slide to a position where it's very consistent with the massing and works with the broader urban planning goals. You can jump to the next slide, Michelle. In addition to being really responsive to the pattern and the texture of the neighborhood to the east or the bottom of the page, and the tree pattern to the south, we wanted to really think about how to create a building that would stand up to and work with the potential development patterns, both to the north or the right and the west along the top of the page. And so the transportation network really drives that as a future street or transportation route. And so we're really trying to keep the building a little bit more of a street wall in that area to really respond to what the future development patterns are going to be. You jump to the next slide, Michelle. The next thing we did is we've spent a lot of time in the neighborhood. And one of the things we really started thinking about is the patterns that you feel walking around the neighborhood really should drive how we're thinking about the building. And so we started to think about how the texture of the edges and open spaces should really start to drive a building that's more of a courtyard typology building. And so we said, all right, this really feels like it could create a building that has a pattern, a texture, and a rhythm that's sympathetic to the neighborhood on the east side, with courtyards that really allow us to delineate those spaces in a way that feels good to the neighborhood. So then we started sort of looking around, and if you jump to the next slide, Michelle, thinking about what are some typological examples of what we're thinking could work here. And we looked in Cambridge, you know, Peterborough Street in Boston, all along Com Ave. There is this texture and rhythm of these courtyard buildings that define and create street edge that's very familiar to the city and familiar to this neighborhood. One of the ones that we found that we thought was really an important connection was Kilmarnock Street, 60 Kilmarnock. If you look here, the red outline is actually the building itself from 60 Kilmarnock. It's about a foot different in length, and it has 2 courtyards instead of 3. So we spent a lot of time sort of looking at this model and thinking about it. Our courtyards are quite a bit deeper, meaningfully so, because the texture and rhythm of our street pattern is different here. But we did find some really nice examples around the city that really talk to the building typology we're trying to create here. And here for the first time, you can sort of see the building mass and scale within the context. And here, the sort of dotted outlines are the building patterns for future development around us. You can see we're really thinking about this as a singular building with courtyards facing Everett and a break on the western wall towards the future development patterns where the grocery store parking lot is there. We've really worked hard to get comfortable with scale, mass, and simplify and clarify what it is we're trying to do here. So if you jump to the next slide, this is the ground floor plan. Ian is going to talk in much more detail about the landscape. What I wanted to do was very quickly orient everyone. So the parking entry that I had talked about, both for loading and access to the complete floor of below grade parking, happens on the left side. At the central courtyard, we're fronting that with lobby and amenity space that wraps around that ramp and creates active frontage on Everett Street. And then as we wrap around the south or left side of the page back into that green space, we've spent a lot of time thinking about active use, fitness, bike lounge, things like that could really create a sense of life and activity along that public realm space. And again, you'll note here, we're really thinking not only about the current plans and what exists around us now, but the future. So that connecting path that Ian will talk about does connect to the front door of the grocery store now, and we think will connect in a really positive way to the future development patterns behind us. So here very quickly, pedestrian paths are in orange, primary access point. Main front door at the lobby and amenity area is in red, and the singular vehicular access point off of Everett. I'm going to let Ian walk through landscape, and then we'll circle back to the building.
Great, thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone. We wanted to start with an open space diagram here that really kind of clarifies what our approach is for the open space. I think we heard from our last meeting that there was a little bit of uncertainty as to how the courtyards worked, what was public, what was private. So here we're just trying to demonstrate the different uses and typologies. So the big move for us here obviously is on the south side, which is plan left. That's the blue. That's a 10,000 square foot new public open space that's driven by tree protection. It's driven by activation, but also the idea of connecting across Everett Street to the existing Star Market retail sidewalk for day one, but then into the future, being able to tie to that planned open space that you see in the teal color. Along the frontage of Everett Street, we have a series of different open space typologies. Shown in purple is what we're calling the active public realm. That's where all the doors and activity going into the building will happen. The orange indicates the resident open spaces. These would be courtyards. The 2 large courtyards are expressed out at the edge of the sidewalk, creating a different landscape experience. And we have some details that can show that in a little more granularity. And then the green shows where the sort of verdant public realm will be wrapping around the building. The dashed blue shows the pedestrian circulation. I mentioned on the south side, we're connecting to the open space and to the Star Market. And then on the north and west side, we are accommodating the Wacker Z complete streets. Here's our overall landscape plan. I won't spend a lot of time on this because we have blow-ups to show up, but just wanting to highlight the big moves. So on the south side, we've worked to reduce the amount of hardscape. We've increased the amount of planting and we've added more public seating. Along the southern portion of Everett Street, we've rearranged that active public realm with the entrance into the garage sliding southward. And then, as I had mentioned, the two courtyards have gotten much bigger with the sliding of the connector for the building, allowing more programmable open space for the residents. Next slide. So here's an enlargement that shows our blow up of the southern open space. Again, we've increased the amount of planting. We've tried to articulate the pedestrian passage from Everett Street to the Star Market side of things. There's a vein of placemaking that we're pursuing, which is a historical interpretive to the site, that used to be on site prior to the redevelopment. You can also see on the right side some of the different types of activation in terms of the bench swings, the types of lighting, and sort of the elements that we're showing for the benches. Next slide. And then here's a street level view that looks at that entrance from Everett Street. We significantly increased the amount of planting, and here are intending to do sort of mound plant beds that really kind of highlight the pedestrian route from Everett Street to the west side. Next. And then, as I had mentioned, we're seeking to do some placemaking interpretation. There used to be a cordage factory that was on this site, and we think there's a narrative there that we can use in the hardscape design that calls back that historic use and offers some historical interpretives of what used to be there. Next slide. And then a blow up of our active public realm. As Brian had mentioned, the entrance into the garage is slid to the left. What that's allowed us to do is to have the elevated courtyard be expressed at sidewalk level by having a green wall element that you can see in the lower right. That landscape movement comes down from the upper level and is expressed at the sidewalk. It's also where we have our blue bikes. And then we have our open plaza area that is the access into the residential entry. And then lastly, a blow up of the balance of the Everett Street frontage, what we're calling the verdant public realm. And the thought here is that we would have our public realm sidewalk be really enveloped in planting between the maintained existing trees and the furnishing strip, the resiliency strip that we're going to be placing in between the trees, and then really trying to wrap the building with a landscape experience.
So I'll quickly walk you through the building design strategy, and then we'll be done. What we wanted to do is just sort of quickly outline the strategic approach to the design of the building itself. And we were really thinking hard about how do we build on this idea of scale of the building and context that's appropriate to the neighborhood. So here you just sort of see the very public areas in red, and then the public realm in blue, the private areas in the tan color, and again, the proposed or future building massing behind. As we jump to the next slide, we sort of adopted this idea of really defining the ground floor in a very meaningful way over on the north side, on the right-hand side, where we pull back and undercut the building gently to really create a distinct break with the public street where we have that private experience. Upper floors are pulled back sort of all the way around the building to create a subtle but meaningful break in the massing here. And then we've articulated a roof deck on the second leg above that primary amenity space down below. And in the next slide, what we're doing is we're building on these ideas even further and patterning the sort of building edges here with a strong texture of inset balconies, carved corners, and horizontal building lines, as well as an additional step back on the other central leg to create this sort of flanking moment around that central courtyard. Again, the idea here is to just be very clean and very simple and very deliberate with a small set of moves and a very limited palette of materials. And if you jump to the next slide, Michelle, you can sort of see what we're talking about here. This is sort of an overall elevation along Everett Street. You can see the depth of these courtyards have increased. The sort of consistency and simplicity of the building form is carried across with the sort of well-articulated upper floor stepping back. On the right-hand side, we sort of have the privacy and the public realm being treated very differently against the building edge. To the left-hand side, where we brought those public functions out to create that strong street edge. Again, just very sort of simple, clean moves. This is a view from across Everett Street, the central courtyard in the middle there. And then you can see the sort of main club, our rival amenity space expressed as a double height space along the street, the elevated courtyard, and then the primary vehicular entry further down to the left. In the next image, we're looking down Everett in the other direction. In all of these, what we tried to do to sort of maintain a context reference point is include the potential future development guidelines and zoning as far as height goes. So here you can see 4 sort of very simple, very clean building forms coming out to address the street behind this broad southern public park. And in the next view, we're looking across the existing field of parking at the grocer, and we're sort of on the Western Ave edge. All of the light red lines that you see in the foreground represent future development of this area in coordination with those zoning heights, which would effectively, we believe, over time, eliminate any of these views. Thanks, Kristen. Just 2 more really quick views. This is a view from across the parking lot in the other direction. Again, this gray mass in front representing future development. And then we did think it was important to really focus on the connection between the front of the grocer on the right back to that public realm and what the experience of that feels like. And then I think our last image is sort of along a sidewalk view on the backside, again, thinking about the rhythm and texture and pattern against the potential future development in the long run. And then just very simple material palette, very, very limited, a darker fiber cement panel up at the top, and in the recesses, a dark iron spot type brick base, horizontal cable railing, and then a wood composite panel. Very, very simple material palette here. And I think that's all we have. So sorry if we ran over trying to cover a lot here. Thank you.
All right, commissioners, any comments?
Happy to get it started. I appreciate the thorough presentation and the sort of understanding certainly how this works within existing kind of planning guidelines. I think and understanding too some of the typological precedents you looked at is certainly helpful also. I think the sort of general massing strategy I think is sound, and I think you've certainly sort of done the due diligence to show the I can make the case for that. I mean, maybe the one thing I really consider on the massing and some of the courtyards, there's a lot of I guess articulation in the inner edges. I wonder if there's a way to kind of clean that up just to maybe make less shadowy spaces. But again, that's pretty minor in the scheme of things. I guess what I would be more just I missed it with the architecture part. So I think that's more in common with the massing. I think I appreciate the material strategy. I'd be curious to understand if you looked at something that maybe doesn't accentuate the horizontality so much. And I think it's a very clear kind of this banding of like brick down below, then wood, then gray. And so given that this is such a long building, you have these courtyards or these sort of inserts that in some ways could make for a logical way to perhaps create some difference that way. Again, something to consider. But I think what I really want to focus on, and maybe there's something I want to hit on, is just the public realm. I think, again, I think the massing makes a ton of sense. I think the plan makes a lot of sense. I think I'm curious about just the experience of a pedestrian walking by. What is the edge between it and what is public and versus what is the sort of private raised courtyards? Like what am I actually seeing there? How engaging is that fence? Even for the residents in those units, A, B, C, B, A, along the edge there, how do I protect those units from the sidewalk as well? Like what's the sort of strategy for really dealing with that kind of nitty gritty edge? And I saw in one case you have, like about a parking area, kind of a green wall. That's sort of a nice strategy there. But again, just throughout the entire length of the Everett Street facade, just kind of curious to know a little bit more of how we can make sure to just be mindful of like what are the edges between public and private? What do we see? The park space along the left, I think, is a really sort of smart addition. I I wonder if there's a way to also understand how many trees are being preserved and if there can be a way to think about preserving more. But again, I think that that makes sense as a way to kind of keep the mature trees as you can to just help ground and set that place up for success. But yeah, I think that's kind of all I got. But
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm happy to pick up from there, Mick Young. Okay. So I'm in agreement with Jonathan. I haven't seen this project since it was probably introduced to the commission. So I think it looks completely different from what I remember. I think I agree with Jonathan. The massing strategy is really sound. And I think, you know, the strategies of the future streets coming in make a lot of sense. It also gives you a temporary, you know, challenge as to where to put the entrance to the loading. And I know you've had a lot of heartbreak about where to actually do it. I think it landed in the right place. But in terms of the architectural expression, I just wonder if we could go to perspective. I just have a couple of questions in terms of material strategy. Right at the entrance, the main entrance to the building, I think I'm not understanding the logic of that elevation strategy, and I'm wondering if there is a way to like further conceal or further think of a material change to the garage. But even more broadly, those are just almost nitpicky comments. I'm not following the strategy of where the wood comes down and where you have the brick, you know, the iron spot brick. I don't understand the rules of the games yet. And so maybe you can give me a little bit of a walkthrough when you're using what material and for what reason.
Sure. Yeah, I wish we had more time. Sorry, my voice is bad too. So the real strategy here is to think about sort of a very simple inner core to the building, and then sort of a little bit of an outer shell. And so the notion here is that the darker materials that you see in the balconies where there are active spaces with people are kind of the most private areas. So they live up high, they live on the back of the courtyard, and then this outer shell, which is sort of the wood textured material, comes down and actually engages the ground in a really tactile and warm way where we have those public spaces on the left. And then over on the right, we let the darker material actually come down to the ground to really create and reinforce that sense of these are private, like the inner core of the building, and they actually pull back and are sort of tucked under. So the strategy at the simplest level is sort of a layering of privacy, and in terms of how those spaces and how those materials work with the connection to the public realm. I don't know if that helps.
No, I think that helps. I just think that the brick material that you're using, you know, feels like your most elevated material, but yet I'm not seeing at the entry. And I'm just wondering if that's something to think about in a better way or a more, you know, thoughtful way. Like, how do we use the nicest material at the street level? It's more tactile. I worry a little bit about the wood, definitely the horizontality. So that Jonathan raised might be an issue, but even just the material, is it just a little bit trendy? And as we think about, you know, this building for 50 years, is it really the right material? I'm not going to suggest yes or no, but it's something I just want you to think about. Is it just more fashionable than
yeah, it's a great comment. We're actually not sort of completely settled on the material palette. For us, I think at this point it's more about, you know, warm and cool. And I think sort of that the warmth coming out to sort of greet and engage the public, and the cool to kind of be the more private space. And so I think I could easily see a version of this where the warmer material as the shell becomes a little harder and a little bit more of that, you know, elevated material, and then the inner becomes a little softer. So we just, you know, we're at the very beginnings of really understanding the material palette. And I think your comments are really wonderful, actually.
That's great. And if you could just think about, entry points, like I said, just having a little bit more durable materials, that probably makes a little bit more sense. And then the last thing I'll just comment, because I know it's not in this rendering, but it's definitely coming. It's all of the HVAC equipment on the roof.
Yep.
There really needs to be a way to think about masking it, because right now, the way you're suggesting, we're going to see it all. And it's not a super high building. So if there's anything that strategy you could think to, have all of the equipment consolidated and there's a low fence or
Yeah.
something, so it's not very visible, I think would be an important piece to the success of this project.
I think that's a great comment. We're really thinking about ganging all the condensers and the equipment to the center, but we have been thinking a lot about the adjacent 125-foot height and how that would feel. So I think that's also something we really need to continue to explore.
Thank you.
I think there's a lot of good progress on the project, but I have to just express a little skepticism about the landscape experience of these courtyards. I do appreciate your studies of the kind of massing. I live in Brookline, and there's a lot of buildings that have these massing conditions, but you enter through the courtyard. I just looked at every single one that I take my dog on a walk around, every single one. And so you have a challenge of this kind of public-private, like the diagram you showed. I appreciated that you did that, but the fact that it's a fence also makes it, and I just wonder what that experience is going to be. And it feels a little odd to me, honestly, even the upper level one and those other ones. I do appreciate the generous streetscape that you've made and the expanded, but I guess all I can say is I'm still a little skeptical about these courtyards. And I don't understand. I mean, I don't know if we have the right to comment on the design of the courtyards because they're not public. I believe they're private.
That's right.
And then you have a tough condition because you're connecting to some future connection on the park on the left that does not exist today. And so again, there's a part of my brain that just gets confused by the landscape overall. And I hate to leave you with that because I know you've done a lot of work on trying to simplify the massing, but there's just this inherent way in which when you showed those diagrams of the kind of crenulated edge, when I understand that, what makes those great in the neighborhoods is that you walk through a garden to get to your front door. And here I have just trouble understanding, hey, get to it, what it is, what its experience on the street is. And I don't really have an answer because, the building mass is what it is. But
Nick Young, I'm
yeah.
just thinking that comment
Yeah.
kind of helps me think of the trouble that I'm having. You have this garage, you have this entry, and you
That's
have like
right.
bikes in between. I mean, you have the ability of thinking about the amenity of entering the building through the center courtyard. And so it's a
That's
big
right.
change. And you could shift that landscape buffer to parallel the front of,
right.
that amenity space. So the clearing is right in between the middle of the courtyard. You enter into the amenity and it's an extension of open space. I mean, I think
Yeah,
that could
I
be
mean,
a
Mimi, I
really
didn't want to suggest it because I don't know if it's possible, but it is like when you showed the other precedents and you showed the kind of courtyards that get like kind of teeth that get taken out, a lot of them were shallower. The ones I know that did this, like there's a garden that faces the street. And so I was like, where are the deeper ones? And the deeper ones are the ones that I know. And the ones that I really like are the ones that you kind of enter into. And it's semi-private. It usually has a fence around it. But if you could and then my skepticism because I had an office in the Alston Brighton area for a while, a decade, is that, you know, you show these beautiful renderings of the streetscape with all this lush planting, but what happens if that planting doesn't survive? You know, it's a tough neighborhood. You still have a Star Market behind you with a huge parking lot. And I just worry that you have this fence there. And I think if there was a way of reconsidering these so that they're not courtyards that are just accessed internally, but more as garden entry points, I would be able to understand them better, just logically as a landscape architect. But
I think it's it's a really interesting comment because from a building design standpoint, we've drawn that a few times.
That's
Uh-huh.
where we started, actually.
Yeah, so I just looking at the plan, Mikyum, and thinking about your comments, I think it would do a number of things. It would sort of maybe make Mimi's comment a little simpler to address. It would make these walk-through gardens like they're trying to be anyway. And I think from a building planning standpoint, there's something very nice and protected about that as entry. So maybe we could do sort of a main entry in the central courtyard and then a smaller entry in the courtyard to the right. And then
right,
we
like
let
that
the
could be
street
a
edge be
fogged
the,
access, you know, that could be
Yeah.
more private. But then the fence makes more sense to me because I hate to like
no,
throw a bomb in the project because I know you guys have worked
No,
hard,
these
but
are
I
good
just
comments. These
No,
are
I
good
just
comments.
started to think like, does it want to be more of an
honestly,
architectural wall if you're going to make it private? Like,
we've drawn it. I think it would be actually.
could you look at it again? Like,
Yeah, it's
maybe
not-
you don't have to go, like all the ones that I know, you go straight in and
Yep.
and A is where you walk in. But I wouldn't even mind if you go like left and right, if that makes it easier since your amenity space is to the left or.
Mhm.
I think we've got a lot of really good fungible space and we've drawn
I
that
appreciate
100 different times. And I honestly, I think that's a fairly easy thing for us
Okay.
to get on board with because Ian and I have drawn it, 20 times together.
Right.
So
And then
I
the
think it's
give
actually
back,
a good comment and one
the
we've been
give
wrestling
back to
with.
the community would be much bigger then,
Much
right?
bigger, yeah.
Much bigger. And then I would start to understand all these kind of irregular shapes because you could start to program them a little bit. I still have, so thank you so much for your flexibility and thinking about this. I was like, should I say anything?
No,
or
I'm
should
glad
Oh,
you
you
did.
should.
But the left one where you have the bikes, if you could go to that perspective, I think the perspective looks beautiful. But I think you had like a green wall in front of that. And I am also skeptical of the green wall and just wondering if you could, while you're looking at this whole thing again, all these kind of entrances and the garage door, that there is a different cadence of access, entry, and then you really have like this notion of garden apartments, garden entrances. The last comment that I would make is on the left side, I think that the park has gotten better. But I think it's too much talking about the connection from, I've forgotten the street name, to the Star Market.
Michelle,
Everett
can you
Street.
jump back to the
Right.
landscape plan?
And
Sorry.
I love trees. I'm a landscape architect, so I think I can say this. I mean, those trees, there's some really nice trees in there, and I agree with you that you should save them. But I'd say right now it really still feels like a path. And you have a real opportunity from the perspectives, the scale feels like you could make like, again, a kind of garden space that's really focuses on staying in the space and really designing them for the residents today. Because it may not be another 15, 20 years that you're going to really make a beautiful connection through. And maybe in the future, I'm not saying don't make the connection, but right now it still feels like that's the most important criteria of designing this space. And if the trees are hemming you in from making like these like more generous rooms where people can gather, and you're starting to do that more than you did before. But I think maybe you don't start with the path, but you start with the rooms themselves, and then you let connections happen. Maybe you don't even have to draw a path all the way through, but it's through the paving of the overlapping rooms that get you from one side to the other. If you had a beautiful like residential quad behind it or something like that, I think my point of view would be really different. But I just wonder.
The grocery store entry isn't doing it for you.
I just wonder if you could really take this space and just make it feel even more like a series of garden amenities. Because I do appreciate that you've created a buffer on both sides. You've got a tough site. You've got like, is it a Petco on the other side that has
It
no
is.
windows?
Mhm.
And so, but I'm always amazed at how people, they're very resilient, and you can make like a really beautiful set of trees with a bench, and like if you design it right, they'll go there no matter what its context is. But there's something about views and all these other things and night lighting and all this stuff that I just would love to see one more step further, to kind of maybe make like you have a wide enough space that you could make a bigger kind of gathering space in the middle that's more connected to the buildings or something like that. I don't want to design it, but
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think we can have a more centralized space and maybe use that to kind of push the path around it so that's
That's
it's not the
right.
primary. Because I think to Brian's point, the idea of having that connectivity to the Star Market is something that we've heard the community would really like from the
Oh, I'm
east side.
sure. I'm sure. I think my point is more of a design aesthetic,
Mhm.
that until Star Market becomes something else, maybe you can make that connection without having to literally draw the path, but
Could be
food for thought.
could be evolutionary. Yeah.
It could be, right?
Mhm.
Can I ask about the existing trees in that diagram?
Yeah.
There's
Yes.
some that are blue and there's some that are green. Do they have meaning?
Yes, yeah, I should have pointed that out. So the bluish ones are 13 existing trees. The big black circle, those are existing tree trunks.
Got
So
it.
we're trying to preserve them along the property line, which is, the furthest from the development of the building.
Okay. And then the ones closest to the building are new just
Mm-hmm.
because of all of the construction interruption. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that was just my question because I could, you might even want pathways closer to the building or to bias the pathways one side or the other,
Right,
just to get that space
Mhm.
right.
in the middle. But I think what's kind of being set up is pretty nice. You have this nice park area that's not only a thoroughfare, then you have a raised amenity courtyard, then you have your main entrance, in the center that's more paving, probably. I don't know how you resolve it. Really makes sense of where your core is in the building. And then you have a more private garden that could be another entry. I think it's nice to program them.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Yeah, the other thing I really like is once those become entries and maybe a little more formal, I think it will start driving the courtyard simplicity, to Jonathan's earlier point about sort of, we're really focused, I hate to say it, on like square footage and
Yeah,
like making sure the
absolutely.
units work, and that does drive some of that, but we have started simplifying. I mean, you'll notice the sort of central leg is much simpler than the other two, so I think we should keep pushing in that direction. I think that was actually a really good comment, so.
Yeah, because I bet you'll start to rethink the shape of these courtyards if you start to think of them as entrances. That it would change how you create the thresholds into the building as well. Because you do have some, I don't know if those gray pads are, I
Those
don't
are
know what
unit
those are.
patios.
Those are unit patios. Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
so there will be activation from those units, but I think to your point, we can have a centralized sort of resident-only entry on that courtyard
Right.
off the sidewalk.
Great. Well, any more comments, or should we go to see if there's any public testimony? Christina, do you want to cue us up?
I would be happy to. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raised hand function and dial 6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Commissioners, at this time, I see no hands raised. Just wanted to flag for you, we're not going to read it into the record this evening, but I did attach a public comment that we had received via email in the materials forwarded to you before this session. Open it up to you all for next steps.
McYoung, Jonathan, we have a choice to make whether we ask the proponent team to come back to subcommittee, or if we gave them enough direction to go to full commission.
I mean, I'm fine with going to full commission, but I would say to the team, we'd want you to take some of these comments about entry seriously and really show us that there's been consideration of that. I have lately seen projects come to full commission that are not quite there yet. And then they run into problems at the full commission. I don't have any other landscape architects tonight, and so I'm speaking on their behalf, but I do know that I think it was Laura who also felt that there was a strange public-private relationship. And so I think if we could ask for you to like authentically look at this, I have no problem. You guys have been really responsive and great.
We're completely committed to doing that. I think the fact that we've already looked at it is going to make that path really easy for us. So
Right.
I definitely think we're committed to that. No
I
question.
appreciate that. Yeah. So
maybe that's
okay with
one
that.
layer of images, of precedent images that you bring on top of your little analysis, so we just all can get in the same or the right frame of mind.
100%.
Yeah.
Jonathan, any thoughts?
No, that makes total sense. Yeah. I mean, that's what we've been talking about this whole time, really, that public private. So really understanding that makes with an understanding of that, I'm fully comfortable going to full commission.
And Commissioners, hi, Tim Alexander from Mill Creek. I just wanted to confirm as well, and thanks again to Ella and Jonathan for setting up and providing the context, but I think they made it clear, and I'll reiterate, the coordination with staff has been really strong and appreciated by our side. And so we'll continue to coordinate and work with them as we incorporate the comments we heard tonight.
Terrific. There is one little, I'm just going to mention it so you think about it, where we're asking you to now have the courtyard, and I am really on board with this strategy, is where you have some existing mature trees. So just think about the drop-off relationship. I still think there's room to do it, to the left of that entry point, but I just want you to address it because it may come up, like where is drop-off happening in relationship to the front door?
Yep. Awesome.
Great. Well,
thank you all.
We assume you're going to work closely with the planning department, and we'll see you in full commission.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you
Thanks so much for the comments.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
Commissioners, we're right on time.
I know.
It's really even. We did it, McYoung.
I think it's just less smart people in the room, right? Like when you have like 7 smart people, then it takes longer, right?
Well, we appreciate everyone's time and attention and participation, and we'll see you all actually not on November 5th, but I believe November 12th for the monthly meeting. We're going to skip the election day. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Mimi.
All right. All right.
All
Thank you all.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye-bye.